the alliance leader of the Epic Alliance and a few core elders were all presiding over the Ghoul Palace. Back then, Supremacy Epic had promised Lin Feng that he would take over the Ghoul Kiliacosm in the shortest time possible. He lived up to his word, and immediately led many elders in preparation to clear out the Ghoul Kiliacosm. However, the situation was not very good. Even with the Supremacy Epic personally presiding over it, although the Ghoul Palace was quickly breached, in reality, there were still many resisting forces in the Ghoul Kiliacosm. This was especially the case for some legions. Apart from the Supremacy Epic himself, the other core elders were not their match. Those powerful supremacies, combined with the power of their legion, were simply top-notch 2-star supremacies. Only Supremacy Epic could suppress them. However, Supremacy Epic was occupied and could not afford to be distracted. Once he left, those legions might even attack the Ghoul Palace. Then, the Epic Alliance would lose all its dignity and suffer heavy losses. Supremacy Epic could not hunt down those resisting supremacies out of such reservations. However, this delayed the Epic Alliance from controlling the entire Ghoul Kiliacosm. This could not be helped. They were in the Ghoul Kiliacosm, after all. It was not their own small Kiliacosm, where there were innumerable members of the Epic Alliance. But in the Ghoul Kiliacosm, controllers of the Epic Alliance like themselves were the outsiders. Losing the home ground advantage greatly reduced the deterrence of the Epic Alliance. The endless stream of resistance forces also overwhelmed the Epic Alliance. At this rate of development, even 100 or 1,000 years might not be enough for them to clear out the Ghoul Kiliacosm. Alliance Leader. 3 legions are coming together. Alliance Leader. 2 more legions are coming. Alliance Leader. 5 more legions are here. Suddenly, the Epic Alliance received some news in succession. Dozens of legions had joined forces at some point and were actually acting together, advancing towards the Ghoul Palace. Supremacy Epic's face was dark. He sneered. Very good. If they hadn't come, I wouldn't have been able to find them. Dealing with them one by one is too much of a waste of time. It's just as well that they came on their own. Supremacy Epic's voice was cold, revealing a chilling killing intent. Clearly, as the dignified alliance leader of the Epic Alliance, a peak supremacy born in the first epic, Supremacy Epic status in the small Kiliacosm was equivalent to Supremacy Ghoul status in the Ghoul Kiliacosm. How could he not be furious after being provoked like this? In his anger, Supremacy Epic was naturally filled with killing intent. At this moment, led by the supremacies, one legion after another had already gradually approached the Ghoul Palace. They had even surrounded it. Some time ago, they had received news that Supremacy Ghoul had been killed in another small Kiliacosm. Many supremacies of the legions still could not believe it then. They had even always felt that it was fake news or a rumor. In their hearts, Supremacy Ghoul had always been an invincible entity. Even descenders from the medium Kiliacosm back then could not do anything to Supremacy Ghoul, let alone the controllers of another small Kiliacosm. However, as time passed, and foreign intruders that were Epic Alliance members increased, many controllers came to a realization. Perhaps their king, their invincible Supremacy Ghoul, had really fallen. Hence, they wanted to save themselves, or rather, they wanted to obtain the legacy of Supremacy Ghoul. As the ruler of the Ghoul Kiliacosm, Supremacy Ghoul had plundered the resources and treasures of the entire Ghoul Kiliacosm. Among them was even the legendary small Kiliacosm origin. The goal of these top-notch supremacies was to obtain this small Kiliacosm origin. Of course, it was useless for them to obtain the small Kiliacosm origin. Even top-notch 3-star supremacies would not be able to use the small Kiliacosm origin. Only a Kiliacosm sovereign candidate that was evolving a small Kiliacosm could use the small Kiliacosm origin. However, the small Kiliacosm origin was extremely precious, so it would not stop them from trading the small Kiliacosm origin with the descenders of the medium Kiliacosm. At the very least, it should not be a problem to exchange for a 3-star boundary stone. At that time, some of the supremacies among them might even become 3-star supremacies, and replace the status of Supremacy Ghoul to become the new ruler of the Ghoul Kiliacosm. Greed made them forget about the danger. Perhaps they had also received news that there was a powerful top 2-star supremacy in the Ghoul Palace. But so what? As long as he was not an invincible 3-star supremacy, what did they have to fear with dozens of legions? Supremacy epic, get out of the ghoul kiliacosm, and we can spare your lives. That's right. Intruders, get out of the ghoul palace and the ghoul kiliacosm. The ghoul kiliacosm is our world, not the world of your epic alliance. If you won't leave, our dozens of legions will annihilate your epic alliance today. Dozens of legions and dozens of top-notch 2-star supremacies all emitted a terrifying aura. They were not afraid of supremacy epic at all. That aura was dense and blotted out everything. It stretched across the void, almost surrounding the ghoul palace. For a moment, even the members of the epic alliance felt threatened. Humph! Supremacy epic snorted coldly. At the same time, he suddenly threw his supreme pagoda into the void. The pagoda quickly expanded, enveloping the entire ghoul palace. If you can break through my pagoda, I won't mind leaving the ghoul palace. Supremacy epic sneered as his gaze swept across the dozens of supremacies. His supreme pagoda could even suppress a 3-star celestial devil emperor. In terms of defense alone, it was rather powerful. The dozens of supremacies looked at each other and did not hesitate. Attack! Dozens of top-notch supremacies and dozens of legions all attacked at this moment. The mighty power seemed to shake the entire ghoul kiliacosm and struck the supreme spatial pagoda hard. Boom! The supreme spatial pagoda shook violently. Its light kept flickering, as if it could shatter at any moment. This shocked the supremacy epic. How is this possible? Supremacy epic knew very well how powerful his supreme spatial pagoda was. At the very least, it had almost never disappointed Supremacy Epic when facing a 2-star supremacy. In fact, with the Supreme Spatial Pagoda, Supremacy Epic could be considered invincible below the level of 3-star. This isn't right. This strange power is suppressing the Supreme Spatial Pagoda. Could it be that a different small kiliacosm can actually suppress it? Supremacy Epic quickly sensed that something was amiss. Normally, he would not have noticed it, but now, as dozens of top 2-star supremacies attacked, he sensed it. The Supreme Spatial Pagoda seemed to be suppressed by the ghoul kiliacosm. Although it was only suppressed by a little, it was indeed suppressed. Even though this suppression did not prevent the Supreme Spatial Pagoda from warping through the Supreme Spatial Passage, its defense was greatly reduced. For a moment, the Supreme Pagoda shook continuously, as if it was in imminent danger. Supremacy Epic clearly did not expect this to happen either. If he continued to resist head-on, the Supreme Pagoda might be damaged. This was his foundation. He could not risk the Supreme Pagoda. He could lead the people of the Epic Alliance to warp space directly. No one could do anything to the Supreme Pagoda when it warped through the Supreme Spatial Passage. However, this way the Epic Alliance would be fleeing. It would undoubtedly be very difficult to infiltrate the ghoul kiliacosm again, or even control it. If Elder Lin were here, Lin Feng appeared in Supremacy Epic's mind. Originally, he had sworn that he would completely control the 3 small kiliacosms, providing Lin Feng with an endless stream of cultivation resources and a safe environment. However, he did not expect to start off unfavorably. He could not even control the ghoul kiliacosm. Buzz. At this moment, spatial ripples suddenly appeared in the void. Right on the heels of that, a voice spread throughout the void. If you retreat now, I can let bygones be bygones. Otherwise, you won't have to wait until the epical cataclysm. You will be reduced to ashes this instant. The slightly cold voice echoed in the void and in the ears of many supremacies. Elder Lin, seeing the figure in the void, a trace of joy also appeared on Supremacy Epic's face. But then, he felt a little ashamed. Back then, when Lin Feng fought 7 3-star supremacies alone, Supremacy Epic had taken charge. He had assumed that there should be no problem dealing with a mere ghoul kiliacosm without a 3-star supremacy, and that Lin Feng could have a good rest. However, unexpectedly, they actually encountered trouble in the ghoul kiliacosm, and Lin Feng still had to step in the end. However, the supremacies in the legions of the ghoul kiliacosm were very confused. Who is he? From how Supremacy Epic is behaving, This person should have a close relationship with the Epic Alliance, and even came to reinforce the Epic Alliance. The aura on this person is very strange. Although he's not a 3-star supremacy, he's very powerful. I feel a sense of danger. Indeed. His entire being seems to be filled with the aura of destruction, as if he wants to destroy everything. Humph. No matter who he is, what can he do against our dozens of legions? These supremacies of the legions were all blindly confident. They felt that, with their combined strength, they had nothing to fear apart from 3-star supremacies. Kill! The supremacies of the legions joined forces and pressed towards Supremacy Epic again, paying no attention to Lin Feng at all. All of their gazes were incomparably fervent. As long as they could defeat Supremacy Epic, they could enter the Ghoul Palace and obtain all kinds of resources and treasures there. They could even obtain the legendary small Kiliacosm origin, and exchange it for a 3-star boundary stone with the Kiliacosm sovereigns. This was their only hope. Lin Feng's gaze was cold. He did not want to attack, but these people left him with no choice. Boom! In the next moment, a mighty tide of destruction appeared. Even the Ghoul Kiliacosm seemed to be shaken. The tide of destruction instantly enveloped all these armies. All the controllers enveloped by the tide of destruction, be they 1-star or 2-star supremacies, were reduced to ashes. No controller could escape. Forget about these 1-star and 2-star supremacies. Even 3-star supremacies would not be able to escape death in the face of Lin Feng's tide of destruction. However, as Lin Feng killed these supremacies of the legions, he could clearly sense that as these supremacies were reduced to ashes, and their energy dissipated in the Ghoul Kiliacosm, they were turned into fuel for the Ghoul Kiliacosm again. This cycle was the foundation of a small Kiliacosm. Hence, no matter how many controllers and living beings died in the small Kiliacosm, it actually did not affect the entire small Kiliacosm at all. Ah no! 3-star. That's a 3-star supremacy. Heavens, I remember now. Didn't those controllers of the Epic Alliance always publicize that one of them, the Dark Domain Supremacy, killed 7 3-star supremacies alone, including our king? Could this be him? That's right. It must be him. Otherwise, how could he crush so many legions into dust in one fell swoop? The strongest legions in the entire Ghoul Kiliacosm were completely annihilated in this battle. Our Ghoul Kiliacosm is finished from now on. When the other spectating controllers saw Lin Feng unleash the tide of destruction, which reduced those legions into ashes majestically, all of them revealed looks of fear. Seeing this scene, how could they still not realize Lin Feng's identity? The Dark Domain Supremacy Lin Feng was a 3-star supremacy of the Epic Alliance. He was an invincible entity who had killed 7 3-star supremacies alone. Once such an entity entered the Ghoul Kiliacosm, who could contend against him? Moreover, after today's battle, the elites of the Ghoul Kiliacosm had all been lost. Even if a 3-star boundary stone appeared, no 3-star supremacy would appear again. Today's battle had already broken the spirit of the Ghoul Kiliacosm. Welcome, Elder Lin. Seeing Lin Feng unleash his prowess and annihilate dozens of powerful legions with a light wave of his hand, such a casual strike and such power excited the members of the Epic Alliance tremendously. They were all fantasizing that one day, they might be able to reach Lin Feng's level as well, unparalleled and invincible. However, none of them knew that Lin Feng was not that interested in this kind of invincibility. What he wanted was not to be invincible like this, but to take another step forward, break free from the shackles, and transcend the small Kiliacosm. At the very least, he had to escape the impending crisis. Elder Lin, are you all right? Supremacy Epic asked worriedly. Only Supremacy Epic knew that Lin Feng's condition was actually very bad. With every move, Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain would be one step closer to the epical cataclysm. There was no knowing when the epical cataclysm would erupt. At that time, no matter how strong Lin Feng was, he would be reduced to ashes by the epical cataclysm. Lin Feng waved his hand and said, "I'm fine. No matter how many controllers there are, they're not much of a threat to me. I'm here today for the small Kiliacosm origin." Small Kiliacosm origin? Supremacy Epic said regretfully, "Elder Lin, After I came to the Ghoul Palace, I immediately wanted to find the small Kiliacosm origin. However, no matter who I asked, there seemed to be no trace of the small Kiliacosm origin. I even suspect that Supremacy Ghoul had never obtained the small Kiliacosm origin back then. Indeed, the small Kiliacosm origin was not so easy to obtain. Even Supremacy Ghoul might not be able to obtain it. Supremacy Epic. Have you ever seen the origin of a small Kiliacosm? Lin Feng suddenly asked. How precious is the small Kiliacosm origin? Although ordinary controllers have never seen it, I've experienced 8 epical cataclysms. I've seen those 3-star supremacies compete for the small Kiliacosm origin before. This could be considered having seen it before. Actually, we'll know if the small Kiliacosm origin is here after giving it a try. There's no need to go through so much trouble to find it. Lin Feng took a deep breath. He naturally had a solution long ago. How do we test it? Alliance leader, please get everyone in the Ghoul Palace to leave. Supremacy Epic nodded. Even though he was very confused about Lin Feng's method, he still immediately sent people to call out everyone in the Ghoul Palace. The entire Ghoul Palace was completely empty. Lin Feng looked at the Ghoul Palace, and a smile gradually appeared on his lips. He said calmly, Alliance leader, the method is actually very simple. My tide of destruction can destroy all power. Be it treasures, world power, or even Kiliacosm domain rules, they can be easily destroyed. However, only the small Kiliacosm origin cannot be destroyed. The small Kiliacosm origin appears during the epical cataclysm in the first place. How can it be destroyed by destructive power? Hence, we'll know after giving it a try. Lin Feng's words also enlightened Supremacy Epic. Indeed, this was the simplest and most practical method. Boom! Hence, Lin Feng unleashed the destructive power. It transformed into a long river that surged towards the Ghoul Palace. Originally, this Ghoul Palace could be considered the ultimate product of Supremacy Ghoul's hard work. Ordinary attacks could not break through the Ghoul Palace at all. But before the mighty tide of destruction, it was insignificant. Practically in the blink of an eye, the Ghoul Palace was reduced to ashes by the tide of destruction. Under the scouring of the mighty tide of destruction, everything in the Ghoul Palace was reduced to dust. However, the moment the Ghoul Palace was completely destroyed, a beam of light illuminated the entire river of destruction. It appeared so dazzling in the pitch-black and surging river of destruction. The small Kiliacosm origin. At this moment, Supremacy Epic was already exclaiming. Without even needing Lin Feng's explanation, he knew that it must be the small Kiliacosm origin. Otherwise, how could it remain unmoved in the tide of destruction? The small Kiliacosm origin. At this moment, not only did Supremacy Epic see it, so did Lin Feng. He was only speculating that since Supremacy Ghoul monopolized the Ghoul Kiliacosm, and even had the ambition of becoming a pseudo-Kiliacosm sovereign, he would definitely collect the small Kiliacosm origin. This was because only by possessing the small Kiliacosm origin was he qualified to trade with the Kiliacosm sovereign. Only then might he obtain a Kiliacosm sovereign-level boundary stone rewarded by the Kiliacosm sovereign. However, although Supremacy Ghoul was the ruler of a Kiliacosm, his knowledge was ultimately a little limited. Supremacy Ghoul only knew that the small Kiliacosm origin was very important to the Kiliacosm sovereigns. It could even be used to trade for everything with the Kiliacosm sovereigns. However, he had no idea what a Kiliacosm sovereign-level boundary stone meant to a Kiliacosm sovereign. How much energy and effort would it take for a Kiliacosm sovereign to nurture a Kiliacosm sovereign-level boundary stone in their small Kiliacosm? Moreover, how massive would the amount of small Kiliacosm origin required be? With the little amount of small Kiliacosm origin collected by Supremacy Ghoul, trading for a Kiliacosm sovereign-level boundary stone with the Kiliacosm sovereign was absurd. However, no matter what plans Supremacy Ghoul had, this small Kiliacosm origin had nothing to do with Supremacy Ghoul now. Instead, Lin Feng benefited from it all. Under the illumination of the destructive power, Lin Feng clearly sensed that the origin of this small Kiliacosm was like an endless stream of vitality. It was filled with vigor and vitality, incompatible with the destructive power. In fact, it was the complete opposite of the destructive power. One was destruction, and the other was rebirth. So this is what the small kiliocosm origin is like. It's not just a kind of energy, but a kind of rebirth. Lin Feng held the small kiliocosm origin in his hand. At this moment he was enlightened. He understood everything now, and no longer had any doubts. From destruction and rebirth, he had comprehended the true meaning of the kiliocosm sovereign. The secret of cultivation for kiliocosm sovereigns lay in destruction and rebirth. Moreover, destruction and rebirth were two sides of the same coin, and interconnected. After destruction, the small kiliocosm would expand and metamorphose wildly. This was undoubtedly rebirth. The source of all this power was actually the small kiliocosm origin. Why could a small kiliocosm undergo metamorphosis after destruction? It was because the small kiliocosm origin itself represented rebirth, life, and all order. The small kiliocosm origin was not any kind of rule, but an agglomeration of all the rules of a small kiliocosm. To a small kiliocosm, the small kiliocosm origin was essential, almost indispensable. Otherwise, the small kiliocosm would be incomplete and threatened by collapse. As long as one had the small kiliocosm origin, no matter how severe the damage to the small kiliocosm was, they could recover rapidly. This was also why those great and powerful kiliocosm sovereigns were all desperately plundering and competing for small kiliocosm origin. Too little. However, Lin Feng was still dissatisfied. This mass of small kiliocosm origin was simply too little. This was despite the fact that Supremacy Ghoul was not an ordinary 3-star supremacy, but a top 3-star supremacy. In fact, Supremacy Ghoul dominated the Ghoul kiliocosm alone. Even the 3-star supremacies of the medium kiliocosm who descended were driven away by Supremacy Ghoul. Domination often meant monopoly. Supremacy Ghoul monopolized the small kiliocosm origin in every epical cataclysm in the Ghoul kiliocosm. But he was ultimately only a 3-star supremacy. It was completely impossible for him to obtain all the origin in every epical cataclysm that erupted. At most, this was just a little small kiliocosm he obtained from the periphery. The cataclysmic power at the core of an epical cataclysm was not something that a mere 3-star supremacy could resist. If one took the risk to collect a large amount of small kiliocosm origin, even a top 3-star supremacy would be reduced to ashes by the cataclysmic power. I'll go to the second small kiliocosm. After Lin Feng obtained the small kiliocosm origin in the Ghoul Palace, his heart was filled with excitement. He now completely understood the direction of his future cultivation. Or rather, he completely understood the path he would take in the future. That was to collect the small kiliocosm origin. He had to collect a large amount of small kiliocosm origin. The more small kiliocosm origin he had, the greater the chance Lin Feng would eventually survive the epical cataclysm in his internal kiliocosm domain and successfully evolve a small kiliocosm, and thus the greater his chance of eventually becoming a kiliocosm sovereign. The small kiliocosm origin had now become the foundation. Elder Lin, I'll go with you. The second small kiliocosm is probably not easy to navigate. Supremacy Epic took the initiative and spoke. All right, let's go. Supremacy Epic manifested the Supreme Spatial Pagoda and they stepped into it. Then, the pagoda shook slightly and immediately entered the Supreme Spatial Passage. As for the Ghoul kiliocosm, it had already lost most of its powerful legion and some top 2-star supremacies. With the power of the Epic Alliance, controlling the Ghoul kiliocosm was a piece of cake. Moreover, after today's battle, everyone in the Ghoul kiliocosm could be considered intimidated by Lin Feng. Even some top 2-star supremacies definitely did not dare to provoke the Epic Alliance's rule over the Ghoul kiliocosm anymore. The entire Ghoul kiliocosm fell into a state of peace. Swoosh! Lin Feng and Supremacy Epic warped from the Supreme Spatial Passage to the second small kiliocosm. This small kiliocosm was called the Anarchy kiliocosm. This anarchy referred to the local factions in this small kiliocosm. They basically existed in name only, and only those medium kiliocosm factions were there. Basically, this small kiliocosm was completely controlled by the medium kiliocosm factions. Hence, deterred by the medium kiliocosm factions, the Epic Alliance had never entered the Anarchy Kiliacosm. However, the moment Lin Feng and Supremacy Epic arrived in the Anarchy Kiliacosm, they immediately attracted the attention of the Medium Kiliacosm factions. These Medium Kiliacosm factions naturally had an acute judgment. They knew very well what it meant for Lin Feng to kill 7 3-star supremacies alone back then. Hence, as soon as Lin Feng arrived at the Anarchy Kiliacosm, 2 3-star supremacies appeared in front of Lin Feng and Supremacy Epic. "Greetings, Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign." The 2 3-star supremacies did not dare to show any disrespect. Despite being dignified 3-star supremacies, they showed utmost respectfulness when facing Lin Feng. They even addressed Lin Feng directly as Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign. In terms of realm, Lin Feng was already a Kiliacosm Sovereign. There was nothing wrong with calling him a quasi-Kiliacosm Sovereign or a demi-Kiliacosm Sovereign. In fact, calling Lin Feng a Kiliacosm Sovereign was justifiable. However, as 3-star supremacies, addressing Lin Feng as Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign undoubtedly showed the greatest respect for Lin Feng. Lin Feng glanced indifferently at the 2 3-star supremacies, but did not comment. He only said calmly, "I only have one request, and that is the small Kiliacosm origin." This was Lin Feng's request. The small Kiliacosm origin. There was only one request. Hearing this, a trace of bitterness appeared on the faces of the 2 3-star supremacies. They looked at each other and saw the helplessness in each other's eyes. However, facing Lin Feng, they had no choice but to relent. Otherwise, the fate of the 7 3-star supremacies would serve as their example. However, how could the small Kiliacosm origin be so easy to obtain? They knew very well that once their answer dissatisfied Lin Feng, if they were not careful, they would even follow in the footsteps of the 7 3-star supremacies. They had no choice but to be careful. The 2 3-star supremacies gritted their teeth and seemed to have made up their minds. They said directly, "We don't have the small Kiliacosm origin, but if Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign insists on obtaining the small Kiliacosm origin, we have a way to offer it to Your Majesty." Supremacy Epic looked at the scene in front of him and felt extremely emotional. These 2 supremacies were both dignified 3-star supremacies. They were basically one of the top few people in the small Kiliacosm. Their word basically carried enormous weight. A word from them could determine the life and death of billions of living beings. Even though Supremacy Epic was famed from the 1st to the 9th epochs, he was still not a 3-star supremacy. In fact, in order to deal with the 3-star celestial devil ancestor, he had to sacrifice himself just to suppress him for merely 10,000 years. This was enough to show how powerful a 3-star supremacy was. They could not be found just anywhere. But now, these 2 3-star supremacies, who were both high and mighty with extraordinary prestige in Supremacy Epic's eyes, were wearing uneasy expressions. They even gritted their teeth and looked cautious, not daring to do anything disrespectful at all. The reason was Lin Feng, the Dark Domain Supremacy Lin Feng. Even a 3-star supremacy was incomparably meek in front of Lin Feng, and even appeared to be treading on eggshells. Not long ago, Supremacy Epic could not even imagine this scene in his dreams, but it had really happened, and right in front of his eyes. There was, "Tell me, what is your method? If your method works, I can let bygones be bygones," Lin Feng said indifferently. Actually, after coming to the Anarchy Kiliacosm, he already knew very well that back then, some of the 7 3-star supremacies came from the medium Kiliacosm factions in the Anarchy Kiliacosm. Lin Feng had ignored it, but that did not mean that he did not know. It was just that he had more important matters to attend to. If Lin Feng was dissatisfied with these 2 3-star supremacies today, he probably would not mind cleaning up the Anarchy Kiliacosm properly. With Lin Feng's current strength, even if he wanted to clean up the Anarchy Kiliacosm, these 2 3-star supremacies could not do anything. They would even be in danger themselves. Hence, the 2 supremacies gritted their teeth and said directly, "We all know that Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign urgently needs the small Kiliacosm origin now. Then, there's only one way. Propel the epical cataclysm to erupt in advance." Ha! Lin Feng's gaze narrowed slightly as he stared intently at the two three-star supremacies. His gaze was sharp as a blade, as if it was constantly slashing at their faces. Of course I know that the eruption of the epical cataclysm is actually beneficial to me. At the very least, a large amount of world origin would appear. However, be it the ghoul chilicosm or the small kiliacosm I am from, the epical cataclysm is not so easy to trigger in advance. It was not that Lin Feng had never thought of triggering the epical cataclysm in advance, but the truth was that he could not do it. Although the epical cataclysm appeared to be very close, it was very, very difficult to trigger it in advance. Even if Lin Feng unleashed all his destructive power, while it might be able to mobilize the origin of destruction in the small kiliacosm, the epical cataclysm in Lin Feng's internal kiliacosm domain would only be triggered in advance. On the other hand, the small kiliacosm might not be affected at all. There was nothing he could do. He only had the realm of a kiliacosm sovereign, but not the strength of a kiliacosm sovereign after all, and was slightly lacking. If he were a true kiliacosm sovereign, the descent of his true body, or even his main battle avatar would very likely trigger the epical cataclysm. This was the difference between Lin Feng and a true kiliacosm sovereign. It was not a difference in realm, but a huge difference in strength. Your Majesty, the kiliacosm sovereign, the epical cataclysm in the ghoul kiliacosm is still very far away, while the ultimate epical cataclysm is arriving in the small kiliacosm you came from. Although it seems to be approaching, it has yet to erupt. What we are talking about is the epical cataclysm in the anarchy kiliacosm. You are confident about triggering the epical cataclysm in the anarchy kiliacosm? A vicious glint flashed across Lin Feng's eyes. He knew very well that once the epical cataclysm erupted in the anarchy kiliacosm, it would definitely cause a series of chain reactions. Now, the three small kiliacosms were gradually merging and becoming one. Once the epical cataclysm erupted in any small kiliacosm, it would trigger the epical cataclysm in the other two small kiliacosms. At that time, the ultimate epical cataclysm would erupt, and everything would be reduced to ashes. Crisis also represented opportunity. Only when the epical cataclysm erupted could Lin Feng obtain a large amount of small kiliacosm origin, and thus survive the epical cataclysm in his internal kiliacosm domain. He would successfully evolve a small kiliacosm, become a true kiliacosm sovereign, and transcend the small kiliacosm. Even I can't trigger the epical cataclysm. Do you have a way to trigger the epical cataclysm in advance? There was disbelief in Lin Feng's tone. Indeed, even Lin Feng, a demi-kiliacosm sovereign, even a quasi-kiliacosm sovereign, could not trigger the epical cataclysm in advance. How could two mere three-star supremacies trigger the epical cataclysm in advance? The two three-star supremacies seemed to have sensed that Lin Feng was very interested in this. Hence, a trace of joy appeared in their eyes. They hurriedly said, "Your Majesty, the kiliacosm sovereign, we are not ordinary three-star supremacies. We descended into the anarchy kiliacosm a long time ago, on the eve of the first epical cataclysm in the anarchy kiliacosm. We offered all the small kiliacosm origin you wanted to His Majesty, the kiliacosm sovereign of the medium kiliacosm. We were not the only ones. The other descenders did the same. Hence, no one in the anarchy kiliacosm could keep small kiliacosm origin at all. However, after experiencing three epical cataclysms and gaining a firm foothold in the anarchy kiliacosm, we have already gained a deep understanding of some of the patterns of the epical cataclysm in the anarchy kiliacosm. Once, a great kiliacosm sovereign sent down his main battle avatar, which sent the anarchy kiliacosm to the brink of collapse. It almost caused the anarchy kiliacosm to fail to survive that epical cataclysm. However, precisely because the main battle avatar of that kiliacosm sovereign had descended and the anarchy kiliacosm was on the verge of collapse, the two of us found the kiliacosm core space of the anarchy kiliacosm. Lin Feng's eyes lit up. You mentioned the kiliacosm core space? That's the foundation of the small kiliacosm. The two of you found the kiliacosm core space. Lin Feng felt that it was a little unlikely. He knew about the kiliacosm core space not from hearsay, but because after he became a quasi-kiliacosm sovereign, he could naturally sense the foundation of the small kiliacosm. The location that was the core foundation of a small kiliocosm would be the kiliocosm core space. There, all the rules of the small kiliocosm could be clearly presented before one's eyes. As long as one could withstand the pressure of the entire small kiliocosm, they could even face the various rules of the small kiliocosm directly. The benefits were unimaginable. Even a true kiliocosm sovereign could not enter the kiliocosm core space of a small kiliocosm. Once they entered by force, it would cause the small kiliocosm to collapse, triggering the ultimate epical cataclysm. However, there were all kinds of miraculous events in the world. Someone had actually discovered the kiliocosm core space by chance, and had even entered it before. That's right, the kiliocosm core space. The two of us had entered it before and tried to comprehend the various rules within, especially the mysterious rules of space and rules of time. However, the moment the two of us entered, our consciousness was overwhelmed by the operation order of the small kiliocosm, or rather, the will of the small kiliocosm. We couldn't stay in the kiliocosm core space for even an instant. We all know that this is a huge opportunity. Unfortunately, even if it's a huge opportunity, we wouldn't be able to enjoy it. We've always taken the initiative to apply to stay in the anarchy kiliocosm because we want to obtain some benefits from the kiliocosm core space. Unfortunately, even after so many epochs, we haven't been able to obtain any benefits. Now that the three small kiliocosms are colliding, we already know that the ultimate epical cataclysm will erupt soon in the small kiliocosm where Your Majesty the kiliocosm sovereign is from. There's no longer any point for us to continue staying in the anarchy kiliocosm. This kiliocosm core space is not meant to be ours. Looks like it should be an opportunity meant for Your Majesty the kiliocosm sovereign. After the two 3-star supremacies finished speaking, their expressions were very complicated. They had guarded the secret firmly for several epochs, believing that they had a shocking opportunity to make a breakthrough. In the end, it wound up benefiting Lin Feng instead. One could imagine the bitterness in their hearts. Lin Feng looked at the two 3-star supremacies. He already knew why the two of them had such complicated expressions. How could the two dignified 3-star supremacies bear to give away the secret and opportunity they had guarded for a few epochs? Naturally, they would reveal such a complicated expression. However, they had made the right choice. Otherwise, Lin Feng would not have let the anarchy kiliocosm and these two 3-star supremacies off so easily. The 7 3-star supremacies had joined forces to deal with Lin Feng. Although the 7 3-star supremacies were already dead, Lin Feng would not let the matter go so easily. Once it was investigated, these two 3-star supremacies would definitely be involved. After all, they were all 3-star supremacies of the anarchy kiliocosm. Who would believe that they were not involved? Take me to the kiliocosm core space. If there's really a kiliocosm core space, I'll let bygones be bygones. Yes, Your Majesty, we will be certain to bring Your Majesty the kiliocosm sovereign to the kiliocosm core space. Joy appeared on the faces of the two 3-star supremacies. They had finally passed. They knew very well how terrifying Lin Feng, a demi-kiliocosm sovereign, was. As a quasi-kiliocosm sovereign, as long as the epical cataclysm in his internal kiliocosm domain did not erupt, he was almost invincible. It was almost comparable to the combat power of the main battle avatar of a kiliocosm sovereign. Such power was truly invincible in a small kiliocosm. Just look at the outcome of the 7 3-star supremacies. Originally, they had hoped that Supremacy Skymon could force Lin Feng to his limit, or trigger the epical cataclysm in Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain, thus dealing with this invincible supremacy once and for all. However, who would have thought that Lin Feng's internal kiliocosm domain was incomparably stable? At least, 7 3-star supremacies were far from enough to force the epical cataclysm to erupt in Lin Feng's kiliocosm domain. Since force would not work, the two 3-star supremacies could only give in and submit. They still wanted to live. Only by living could there be hope. No matter how precious the kiliocosm core space was, it was far less precious than their own lives. Dark domain supremacy, will there be a problem with these two? I've never heard of this kiliocosm core space. Seeing that Lin Feng seemed to have been persuaded by two unfamiliar 3-star supremacies with a few words, Supremacy Epoch was a little worried. He was born in the first epoch and lived until the ninth epoch and had seen many things, but he had never heard of anything called the Kiliacosm core space. However, Lin Feng smiled and said indifferently, "Don't worry, they wouldn't dare to lie to me. In this small Kiliacosm, if I want to kill someone, no one can stop me." Lin Feng told Supremacy Epoch not to worry, and his tone was filled with dominance. In his current state, he could indeed kill anyone he wanted. Forget about two mere 3-star supremacies. Even if there were a few more 3-star supremacies, Lin Feng was more than capable of killing them. Moreover, Lin Feng knew the Kiliacosm core space himself very well. This was a secret. Many Kiliacosm sovereigns would not casually mention the Kiliacosm core space. Only those very ancient and top-notch 3-star supremacies could know this secret. Lin Feng had never heard of the secret, but he was a true Kiliacosm sovereign in terms of realm. Naturally, he could sense the existence of the Kiliacosm core space. It was just that he could not enter it. Alliance leader, you can return to the Epic Alliance first. Without you presiding over the Epic Alliance, I'd also be worried, Lin Feng said to Supremacy Epoch. Even two 3-star supremacies could not enter this Kiliacosm core space, let alone Supremacy Epoch. Letting Supremacy Epoch return to the Epic Alliance to preside over it could also avoid some unnecessary trouble. All right, Elder Lin, take care. If you need anything, inform the Epic Alliance and me at any time. Supremacy Epoch looked deeply at Lin Feng. He also knew that even though he was the alliance leader of the Epic Alliance, and was once an invincible 2-star supremacy, there was nothing he could do before Lin Feng and those 3-star supremacies. At this moment, as long as he did not cause trouble for Lin Feng and stabilize the Epic Alliance, it would be of help to Lin Feng. After Supremacy Epoch left, Lin Feng said to the two 3-star supremacies, "Let's go to the Kiliacosm core space." The two 3-star supremacies nodded, then led the way towards the depths of the Anarchy Kiliacosm. With the speed of 3-star supremacies, no matter how far the distance was, it was nothing. Moreover, the location of the Kiliacosm core space did not seem far. In an abandoned Kiliacosm domain corridor, Lin Feng and the two 3-star supremacies both stopped. "Your Majesty, the Kiliacosm Sovereign. That's the place. Through that vortex is the Kiliacosm core space." The two 3-star supremacies pointed at a pitch-black vortex in front of them. Actually, even without their guidance, Lin Feng had already sensed it. He sensed that the core of the entire Anarchy Kiliacosm seemed to be here. Strands of familiar and unfamiliar aura of rules spread out of the vortex. There was a faint and vast power that seemed to intend to close or repair this vortex, but it never succeeded. This was because there was some special power there that was incompatible with the Anarchy Kiliacosm. It even gave Lin Feng a familiar feeling. After careful thought, he understood. It's because it was the power of the Kiliacosm Sovereign. A Kiliacosm Sovereign's main battle avatar once descended to the Anarchy Kiliacosm. Perhaps that's the power left behind by the Kiliacosm Sovereign's main battle avatar. Lin Feng's heart skipped a beat, as if he had guessed the reason. "Your Majesty, the Kiliacosm Sovereign. This is as far as we can take you. We cannot enter the Kiliacosm core space," the two 3-star supremacies said. Lin Feng nodded and looked at the huge vortex, his eyes burning with fervor. The Kiliacosm core space. This was a genuine Kiliacosm core space, the Kiliacosm core space that even Kiliacosm sovereigns could not forcefully enter. However, through this strange manner, an entrance was left behind by a freak combination of factors. Even the Kiliacosm sovereign who had sent down a main battle avatar back then probably did not expect a passage to be broken through in the Kiliacosm core space. However, Lin Feng still had to go in and take a look to know what the Kiliacosm core space was like. Moreover, Lin Feng had a vague feeling that entering the Kiliacosm core space this time would be crucial to him. Swoosh! Lin Feng took a step forward, and his figure transformed into a stream of light that flew into the Kiliacosm core space. In the palace of the Skyhorn Alliance in the medium Kiliacosm. Boom! Suddenly, a terrifying aura erupted with a bang. Sensing this aura, the 3-star supremacies in the palace trembled all over, and their expressions changed drastically. This This is His Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign's main battle avatar. Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign, don't act rashly. It's really not worth it to send down your main battle avatar for a mere small Kiliacosm. Other Kiliacosm Sovereigns are still targeting us. Once this main battle avatar is damaged, we probably won't be able to enter other small Kiliacosms for billions of years. Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign, please reconsider. In the hall, the 3-star supremacies were already kneeling. The great and powerful Kiliacosm Sovereign of the Sky-Horn Alliance sat high on the throne. In front of him was a figure with a terrifying aura that was only inferior to his aura. That was his main battle avatar, an avatar that consumed his accumulated power over billions of years to cultivate successfully. I've already made up my mind. You don't have to persuade me anymore. Go down and make preparations. I want to make the lowly and pitiful worms of the lower Kiliacosm tremble. I want to personally capture that worm Lin Feng and let him experience the supreme authority of the Kiliacosm Sovereign. There was a trace of anger in the Kiliacosm Sovereign's tone. The dignified Kiliacosm Sovereign was truly infuriated. Even if it was not for the mystery of time, the Kiliacosm Sovereign would definitely make Lin Feng pay a heavy price. That lowly cultivator who dared to look down on him and ruin his plans time and time again must die. Seeing this, the other 3-star supremacies already knew that His Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign was determined to send a main battle avatar. They stopped persuading him and began to make preparations. Everything is ready, Your Majesty the Kiliacosm Sovereign. Soon, the Ascension array had been set up. The Kiliacosm Sovereign of the Sky-Horn Alliance personally presided over it. Then, a vast power was infused into the Ascension array. Buzz! A huge pillar of light instantly enveloped the Kiliacosm Sovereign's main battle avatar. Go and capture Lin Feng. If you can't, destroy the entire small Kiliacosm, destroy everything, and just bring back the origin of the 3 small Kiliacosms. As soon as the Kiliacosm Sovereign finished speaking, the pillar of light shook violently. Then, it enveloped the main battle avatar and quickly disappeared. At the same time, in an unknown void in the small Kiliacosm, boom! An unprecedentedly terrifying pillar of light suddenly appeared, shaking the entire small Kiliacosm. That's a Ascension passage? It's a Ascension passage, and its aura is so terrifying. Which supremacy is descending? Even if 10 3-star supremacies descend, there shouldn't be such a huge commotion, right? There are more than 10 3-star supremacies. There must be at least dozens of 3-star supremacies. Can't you see that the small Kiliacosm is shaking? Although the epical cataclysm hasn't been triggered, if the small Kiliacosm is shaken, the epical cataclysm will definitely be brought forward significantly. I wonder which faction is making such a major move, be it the Descenders or the members of the Epic Alliance. They all clearly sensed the tremors of the small Kiliacosm. For a moment, countless gazes immediately focused on this stretch of void. Swoosh! Supremacy Epic rushed to this stretch of void immediately. After all, he had the supreme spatial pagoda. Supremacy Epic was the best at spatial warp. However, apart from Supremacy Epic, some other Descenders also seemed to have arrived. Who is it? Supremacy Epic's expression was solemn. From the 1st to the 9th epoch, he had seen countless Ascension passages and countless Descenders, but never had he seen such a terrifying commotion. The current small Kiliacosm was in troubled times. The last thing Supremacy Epic wanted was for powerful Descenders to come down from the medium Kiliacosm. That would break the current peace of the small Kiliacosm. As the Ascension passage gradually stabilized, a figure slowly came down from the Ascension passage. Boom! As soon as this figure appeared, everyone seemed to feel suffocated all of a sudden. A mighty and peerlessly domineering aura spread in all directions. At the same time, this figure's gaze looked down on all living beings, as if he was a natural king looking down on everyone. I am Kiliacosm Sovereign Sky-Horn. From now on, these 3 small Kiliacosms belong to me. Those who submit will prosper, and those who resist will die. All controllers, as long as you find the dark domain supremacy, Lin Feng, I will reward you. The majestic voice sounded like a clap of thunder in everyone's ears. Everyone's body shook, still in disbelief. Kiliakosm sovereign? How can it be a Kiliakosm sovereign? Heavens! Is that the Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn behind the Skyhorn Alliance? The Kiliakosm sovereign has descended. No, it should be an avatar of the Kiliakosm sovereign. Moreover, it's the main battle avatar. This is serious. From today onwards, we won't get a share in these 3 small Kiliakosms anymore. We've already informed His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign, but His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign asked us not to interfere. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn didn't hesitate to send down his main battle avatar. This means he's already enraged. Even His Majesty the Kiliakosm sovereign behind us wouldn't want to fight with him at this time. That supremacy epic Lin Feng is a demi-Kiliakosm sovereign. But so what? He's actually provoked Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn into descending with a main battle avatar. This time, Lin Feng is dead for certain. Many descenders knew very well what the main battle avatar of a Kiliakosm sovereign represented. Although the Kiliakosm sovereign was not here personally, during the competition for the small Kiliakosm, the main battle avatar of the Kiliakosm sovereign was already the strongest power the Kiliakosm sovereign could mobilize. Even other Kiliakosm sovereigns were unwilling to fight with Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn at a time like this. After all, the main battle avatar could not descend so easily, and the price was too great. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn could stake everything and act with reckless abandon. But the other Kiliakosm sovereigns would not share the same madness. They would not stake everything like him. The Kiliakosm sovereign's avatar? Supremacy Epic was shocked and immediately felt his entire body turn cold. A Kiliakosm sovereign. A Kiliakosm sovereign had actually descended. Even the avatar of a Kiliakosm sovereign was a great Kiliakosm sovereign. Just sensing that aura made Supremacy Epic feel as if he was about to suffocate. How could he be so easy to deal with? In particular, Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's target was Lin Feng. No matter what, Supremacy Epic would not let Lin Feng be killed by Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's avatar. Run. I must run. Inform Lin Feng of this news immediately. Supremacy Epic entered the Supreme Spatial Pagoda almost without hesitation. Buzz. The immediate appearance of the Supreme Spatial Passage also attracted the attention of Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn. His gaze focused, and a trace of coldness flashed across his eyes. A treasure that can warp through the Supreme Spatial Passage? It should be the Supreme Pagoda of the Epic Alliance, right? In that case, it's the Alliance leader of the Epic Alliance, Supremacy Epic. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's gaze was cold. He had long investigated all the information around Lin Feng clearly, so he naturally knew about the Supremacy Epic. None of the people around Lin Feng can escape. Come out. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn extended his hand and suddenly grabbed at the Supreme Spatial Passage in the void. Boom! The Supreme Spatial Passage had always been mysterious. Once one entered the Supreme Spatial Passage, even a 3-star supremacy could do nothing. Relying on this special ability, Supremacy Epic was undefeated. Even if he could not defeat a 3-star supremacy, he could still escape calmly. However, this time he was up against Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn suddenly grabbed towards the Supreme Spatial Passage. The entire Supreme Spatial Passage seemed to be shaking violently, and the Supreme Spatial Pagoda was also a little unstable. Crack. Suddenly, the Supreme Spatial Passage was forcefully broken like glass. A huge hand instantly enveloped the Supreme Spatial Pagoda. No, Lin Feng, run. You must run. Supremacy Epic sent messages to Lin Feng frantically. He had personally experienced how terrifying a Kiliakosm sovereign was. A Kiliakosm sovereign could even break through the Supreme Spatial Passage. Such a terrifying power was simply shocking. Invincible. The Kiliakosm sovereign was invincible. At this moment, even Supremacy Epic despaired. Boom! As Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's palm landed, the Supreme Spatial Pagoda was immediately seized by him. The Supreme Spatial Pagoda, which originally had incomparably strong defense, was now casually grabbed by Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn like a toy. Interesting. It's quite a good treasure. However, that's all. Tell me Lin Feng's whereabouts, and I can spare your life. There was no response from the Supreme Spatial Pagoda the entire time. How obstinate. You have no idea how majestic the power of the Kiliakosm sovereign is. How can this mere spatial artifact protect you? Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn sneered. Then he squeezed hard. Crack. The Supreme Spatial Pagoda was covered in dense, spider web-like cracks at once, as if it would shatter at any moment. Bang. Finally, the Supreme Spatial Pagoda shattered. A supreme spatial treasure was casually crushed by a Kiliakosm sovereign's avatar. A Kiliakosm sovereign. This was a Kiliakosm sovereign. A supreme Kiliakosm sovereign with majestic power. Supremacy Epic appeared in front of Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn. Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn stood with his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "Tell me Lin Feng's whereabouts and you may live." Heh! Supremacy Epic laughed out loud. It was as if the shattering of the Supreme Spatial Pagoda had completely shattered a certain persistence in his heart as well. Everything will be reduced to ashes in the epical cataclysm. What's the point of sparing my life now? You're not going to tell me? Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn's eyes narrowed slightly, as if he did not care much about it either. Then die. Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn casually clapped his hand, as if he was killing an insect. Even a 3-star supremacy was insignificant in the hands of Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn. There was still a smile on Supremacy Epic's face. At that moment, he felt as if he could already see his end. Lin Feng, I've already done everything I can. You'll have to rely on yourself from now on. Supremacy Epic muttered softly. Bang. Everything returned to calm, but many people knew that from this moment on, peace had already left this small Kiliakosm. When Lin Feng first stepped into the Kiliakosm core space, it was very difficult to describe everything here with words. If he had to describe it, this was the treasure trove of the entire small Kiliakosm. It was filled with all kinds of small Kiliakosm rules, densely packed and simply innumerable. These rules circulated independently and could not be disturbed at all. Otherwise, if the rules became chaotic, it would cause huge changes to the entire small Kiliakosm. These rules were clearly presented to Lin Feng. Even the rules of space and rules of time were presented to Lin Feng. Even Kiliakosm sovereigns would covet such a treasure vault. Unfortunately, even Kiliakosm sovereigns could not find such a treasure vault without opportunities. It was not that easy to enter the Kiliakosm core space. The moment Lin Feng entered, he felt pressure. It was incomparable pressure, as if he was facing the entire small Kiliakosm. Faced with a small Kiliakosm, even a main battle avatar of the Kiliakosm sovereign could not withstand it. Even Kiliakosm sovereigns did not dare to provoke it lightly, because once they faced the complete pressure of the small Kiliakosm alone, it might trigger the epical cataclysm. The epical cataclysm might trigger the epical cataclysm in the body of the Kiliakosm sovereign. Even Kiliakosm sovereigns might fall as a result. That's the small Kiliakosm origin. Those are the rules of space. Those are the rules of time. Lin Feng saw them. The rules of space, the rules of time, and even the small Kiliakosm origin were all presented before his eyes. Even a glance could benefit him for the rest of his life. With just a glance, Lin Feng felt as if the supreme rules of space, regarding which he had been stuck at a bottleneck for all this time, had become clear all of a sudden. It's as if he's been enlightened at once. Actually, since Lin Feng obtained the spatial disk a long time ago, he had been studying the supreme rules of space. Unfortunately, there was no progress. Later, after entering the supreme spatial passage, Lin Feng could sense the supreme rules of space more clearly. At that time, Lin Feng had actually already gained a deep understanding of the supreme rules of space, especially with some unique understanding of his own. Could be considered to have entered a new realm. He was only missing an opportunity to comprehend the supreme rules of space. This was something that even Supremacy Epic had not accomplished. In fact, Supremacy Epic only lacked an opportunity to truly comprehend the supreme rules of space. Once he comprehended them, combined with the supreme spatial pagoda, he would truly be free to do anything. Even a peak 3-star entity, and even Lin Feng would not be able to do anything to Supremacy Epoch. He could escape and leave whenever he wanted. Unfortunately, Supremacy Epoch and Lin Feng both lacked something. All they lacked was actually just an opportunity. If this opportunity did not appear, it would be useless no matter how much time had passed. Even if tens of millions of years, hundreds of millions of years, or even a few epochs passed, as long as that opportunity did not appear, one would never be able to comprehend the supreme rules of space. But now, an opportunity had appeared right in front of Lin Feng, the moment he entered the Kiliacosm core space and saw the supreme rules of space. In particular, they appeared right in front of Lin Feng. The supreme rules of space were circulating and evolving almost right in front of Lin Feng. All the secrets were gone. Lin Feng suddenly understood, as if he had reached an epiphany all at once. Everything happened naturally. Lin Feng had comprehended the supreme rules of space, and he had comprehended them almost naturally. Not only that, there were also some other rules. Originally, there were many Kiliacosm rules in Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain. However, these Kiliacosm rules could only be considered supplementary to Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain, and were not comprehended by Lin Feng. As the destructive power in Lin Feng's body destroyed all the Kiliacosm domains, those Kiliacosm rules naturally disappeared. However, Lin Feng had once controlled these Kiliacosm domain rules after all. Hence, he was incomparably familiar with them, and they had all reached the critical point. For example, Lin Feng had not mastered the rules of time. He only mastered the rules of time by relying on the Kiliacosm domains. However, after using the rules of time for so many years, his understanding of the rules of time was also unparalleled. All he needed was an opportunity. And now the opportunity had arrived, and it was right in front of him. In the Kiliacosm core space, everything, including the rules of time, were actually operating before Lin Feng's eyes. Such an opportunity could only be chanced upon by luck. This was equivalent to someone demonstrating the rules in detail. This demonstration was not just about using them, but about displaying them bit by bit. Even the slightest detail was clearly displayed before his eyes. He could even understand the principles behind the operation of the rules clearly. If one had not come into contact with these rules before, they might not be able to understand anything. However, if they had and even knew these rules very well, this would be a huge opportunity. Lin Feng felt as if he had been enlightened. All kinds of rules were no longer secrets before him. The 3,000 principles referred to all kinds of rules, but there were actually far more than 3,000 types of rules in a small Kiliacosm. The rules were simply innumerable. And now, these rules no longer held any secrets before Lin Feng. These included the rules of time. At this moment, Lin Feng finally understood the rules of time. Everything about the rules of time flowed through his mind. Even if his Kiliacosm domain shattered now, Lin Feng had still grasped the rules of time, and was no longer dependent on the Kiliacosm domain. Of course, no matter how many rules one comprehended, it would not be of much use. To ordinary people, this opportunity was actually not much of an opportunity. However, to Lin Feng, the Kiliacosm core space was indeed an enormous opportunity. Just these various rules alone allowed Lin Feng to completely understand the patterns of operation of the small Kiliacosm. Through these rules, Lin Feng had a direct understanding of the patterns of operation of the small Kiliacosm. If he wanted to evolve a small Kiliacosm, he could undoubtedly evolve the most perfect small Kiliacosm overnight. Of course, the prerequisite was that he could survive the epochal cataclysm and attain rebirth in it. Lin Feng could sense that his accumulation was becoming deeper and deeper. The so-called accumulation did not refer to the small Kiliacosm origin, but to the accumulation of cultivation and evolving the small Kiliacosm. And now, this accumulation was becoming deeper and deeper. This also meant that Lin Feng's success rate in evolving a small Kiliacosm was becoming higher and higher. He was only missing the small Kiliacosm origin now. However, the small Kiliacosm origin was a difficult problem. Was he really going to trigger the epochal cataclysm in advance? Lin Feng glanced at the small Kiliacosm origin in the Kiliacosm core space. He saw it. Unfortunately, He knew that once he tried to touch the small kiliacosm origin, he would probably be attacked by the will of the entire small kiliacosm immediately. Lin Feng could not withstand that pressure. However, Lin Feng also vaguely understood that as long as he willed it, and unleashed the destructive power in the kiliacosm core space, the epical cataclysm in the anarchy kiliacosm would erupt instantly. At that time, the small kiliacosm origin would also erupt from the kiliacosm core space. That was Lin Feng's opportunity, but at the same time, he might also encounter danger. Lin Feng was in a dilemma. Supremacy Epic is in trouble. Just as Lin Feng was pondering if he should trigger the epical cataclysm in advance, suddenly, he received a message for the Dark Domain Supremacy. A kiliacosm sovereign has descended. Lin Feng muttered softly. Thoughts churned in his mind as he pondered over something. Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn. Lin Feng had a very bad premonition. He knew that Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn might descend, but he did not expect him to descend so soon, and it was the Kiliacosm Sovereign's main battle avatar. Just now, Lin Feng had a sudden feeling and had a vague premonition. Now, he finally understood the reason. Supremacy Epic. Lin Feng fell silent. These messages were the last words of the Supremacy Epic. He did not know if Supremacy Epic was dead. Perhaps he had already fallen, or perhaps there was still hope. However, Lin Feng could not sit back and do nothing. Hence, Lin Feng left the Kiliacosm core space without even looking at it. Swoosh! With a flash, Lin Feng had already entered the Supreme Spatial Passage. With the various small Kiliacosm rules that Lin Feng had comprehended now, at least in the small Kiliacosm, there was no place that could trap him anymore. Moreover, having comprehended the supreme rules of space, Lin Feng could go anywhere with a thought. Bang! As Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn slammed his palm down, Supremacy Epic had no chance of surviving. He was shattered into dust and fell completely. Not even a trace of his aura was left. Everyone was stunned, especially those members of the Epic Alliance. They could not believe their eyes. In the Epic Alliance, the Dark Domain Supremacy Lin Feng had ascended to power, and had even killed 7 3-star supremacies alone. He could be said to be the current number 1 supremacy in the small Kiliacosm. Lin Feng's reputation spread far and wide. No one dared to disobey him. However, in the Epic Alliance, no one's authority could surpass Supremacy Epic. The reason was very simple. The Epic Alliance was itself established by Supremacy Epic. Supremacy Epic had dedicated a few epochs of hard work to the Epic Alliance. All along, the image of Supremacy Epic had always been invincible. He was unparalleled and almost never met his match. Even the 3-star Celestial Devil Ancestor back then could not do anything to Supremacy Epic. If Supremacy Epic wanted to, he could even sacrifice himself to suppress the Celestial Devil Ancestor. But now, Supremacy Epic was dead. Moreover, he had been pulverized by a single palm strike from Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn in front of everyone, reduced to dust in the void, and fell completely. At this moment, many members of the Epic Alliance seemed to feel a certain conviction in their hearts shatter completely with the fall of Supremacy Epic. Silence. The entire void was incomparably calm. However, to Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn, this was a common occurrence. He did not care about a mere peak 2-star supremacy at all. Forget about a peak 2-star supremacy, even a 3-star supremacy was nothing in the eyes of Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn. Anyone who can tell me the whereabouts of the Dark Domain Supremacy, Lin Feng, can live. The voice of Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn echoed majestically in the void. It was as if a word from him could shake the small Kiliacosm. This was a Kiliacosm Sovereign. A supreme Kiliacosm Sovereign. In some aspects, the main battle avatar of a Kiliacosm Sovereign was actually no different from a Kiliacosm Sovereign. They were both invincible entities that were impossible to contend with. However, no one replied to Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn. The members of the Epic Alliance all fell into a dead silence. Facing the threat of Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn, they did not respond at all. Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn's expression darkened. He was a dignified Kiliacosm Sovereign. When had he ever received such treatment? No matter where he was, Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn was certain to be the center of attention. Countless controllers would come to curry favor with him and take the initiative to give him what he wanted. But now, no one responded to his request. In that case, Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn was also frustrated, so he did not ask anymore. All of you will die. I don't believe it that Lin Feng can still hide when I slaughter everyone. Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn did not care about bloodshed. He did not even care about the destruction of this small Kiliakosm. If he could, he would even want to destroy this small Kiliakosm. Rage had already made the Kiliakosm sovereign lose his mind. All he wanted to do now was to find Lin Feng, capture him alive, and bring him back to the medium Kiliakosm to slowly torture him. He wanted Lin Feng to know that the authority of a Kiliakosm sovereign was inviolable. We'll die without hesitation. It's just dying. This Kiliakosm sovereign killed the alliance leader. That means making an enemy of all the members of our epic alliance. Kill. So what if he's a Kiliakosm sovereign? Haha, if you want to find the whereabouts of Elder Lin, we won't tell you even if you're a Kiliakosm sovereign. In your dreams. Countless members of the epic alliance were furious, and very furious at that. Those who were not members of the Epic Alliance could not imagine what Supremacy Epic meant to the members of the Epic Alliance. That was almost their source of mental support. In fact, most of the members of the Epic Alliance, especially those ancient members, only survived until the 9th Epic because Supremacy Epic used the Supreme Space Pagoda to save them one by one from the epical cataclysm. Otherwise, they would be long dead. Without Supremacy Epic, they would not exist. At this moment, everyone erupted. Even when facing a high and mighty Kiliakosm sovereign, even when facing an invincible Kiliakosm sovereign, the Kiliakosm sovereign who had killed Supremacy Epic was already the mortal enemy of all the members of the Epic Alliance. Huh? These ants dare to resist. Killing intent. Monstrous killing intent. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's gaze turned cold, and his expression was incomparably dark. He had dominated countless small Kiliakosms. Even in the medium Kiliakosm, he was a supreme Kiliakosm sovereign who stood above all living beings. Since when did mere ants, ordinary controllers, or one-star supremacies dare to harbor killing intent towards an eminent, invincible and great Kiliakosm sovereign like him? Such offense almost caused Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's killing intent to condense into substance. A bunch of ants. If I want you to live, you'll live. If I want you to die, you'll die. How dare you try to kill me? Your crimes are simply heinous to the extreme. You all deserve to die. At this moment, Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn had lost all patience. This group of ants in his eyes dared to develop killing intent towards him. How could Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn not be furious? Hence, Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn extended his hand. Just one hand was overwhelming, and appeared to envelope the entire void of the Kiliakosm domain corridor at once. He did not even care if they were members of the Epic Alliance. Even some controllers of the medium Kiliakosm faction were enveloped. Everyone was shocked and fled backward in a frenzy. However, no matter how fast they fled, how could they escape a palm strike from Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn? Those who disobey the Kiliakosm sovereign shall die. Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn slammed his palm down. The surrounding void and rules seemed to be shattered at once. Even the entire Kiliakosm domain shook. It far exceeded the power of half a Kiliakosm. Boom! A terrifying power spread in all directions. However, many controllers suddenly realized that they were not dead. At some point, a white-robed man had appeared in the void. He stood quietly in the void. Beside him, there seemed to be countless rules surrounding him. There was also a terrifying destructive power that made him seem like a demonic god. It was this seemingly thin body that stood firmly in the void like a pillar holding up the sky, blocking in front of many members of the Epic Alliance. Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn's palm did not land. You came here after all. A smile gradually appeared on the corners of Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn's lips. However, his gaze became colder and colder, chilling as perennial ice. Kiliakosm's sovereign Skyhorn. Lin Feng muttered softly, a strange glint flashing across his eyes. The white-robed man was Lin Feng. He looked at the sky-horn Kiliacosm sovereign, appearing very calm. Of course he could tell that this was an avatar of Kiliacosm sovereign Skyhorn, a main battle avatar. In the void, Lin Feng seemed to be sensing something. Suddenly he frowned slightly. He had finally captured a trace of the aura of Supremacy Epic. However, this trace of aura was too faint. Supremacy Epic was already dead. Even the supreme spatial pagoda had already shattered. Lin Feng fell silent. He had come in the end, but he was still too late. Even though Lin Feng had only interacted with Supremacy Epic for a short period of time, it felt as if he had known him for billions of years, or even for a few epochs. They were lifelong friends. Supremacy Epic was the kind of person who protected the local controller all his life. If not for Supremacy Epic, the celestial devils would have long ruled the entire small Kiliacosm. There were countless people who had received the favor of the Supremacy Epic, direct or indirect. The reason Lin Feng could grow all the way to the present was actually also because he had indirectly received the favor of Supremacy Epic while he was very weak. Otherwise, how could he have grown so smoothly? He would probably have been devoured by the celestial devils long ago. Supremacy Epic was selfless. He was even willing to sacrifice himself to suppress the celestial devil ancestor. Lin Feng rarely admired anyone in his life, but in all aspects he admired Supremacy Epic deeply. Lin Feng had even secretly made up his mind that if he could become a true Kiliacosm sovereign one day, he would definitely produce a Kiliacosm sovereign level boundary stone, and let Supremacy Epic become a pseudo-Kiliacosm sovereign. But now it was all too late. Supremacy Epic had already fallen. Perhaps Supremacy Epic can still be saved. I have grasped the rules of time and can revive you from the river of time, but my strength is insufficient now. In the future, after I become a Kiliacosm sovereign, I'll give it a try no matter what. Supremacy Epic, wait for me. It won't be long. Lin Feng muttered softly. His tone was emotionless, but sorrow filled the depths of his heart. Sometimes, sorrow could be converted into strength. Lin Feng was not angry, but there seemed to be a power gradually rising in the depths of his heart. Swoosh! Lin Feng directed his gaze at Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn. You were the one who killed Supremacy Epic? That's right. I was the one who killed him. Why? Do you want to avenge Supremacy Epic? He's just an ant. Not only did I kill him, I also want to destroy the Epic Alliance you care about, and kill everyone around you. This is the price you have to pay for provoking a great Kiliacosm sovereign. Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn's tone was cold, and the aura on his body became stronger and stronger. It seemed overwhelming and ready to crush Lin Feng completely. However, no matter how powerful Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn's aura was, Lin Feng did not move. The aura of destruction on his body merely became thicker and thicker. Even the small Kiliacosm was shaking slightly. Vaguely, there was a sign of cataclysmic power in Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain. The so-called cataclysmic power was the power of the cataclysm. As Lin Feng mobilized the tide of destruction in his internal Kiliacosm domain, inevitably, his internal Kiliacosm domain intended to evolve into a small Kiliacosm, and the epical cataclysm was imminent. This was undoubtedly the last thing Lin Feng wanted to see. A smile appeared on the corners of Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn's lips. He naturally saw through Lin Feng's current state at a glance, so he laughed and said, Cataclysmic power has already appeared in your body. The epical cataclysm in your internal Kiliacosm domain will erupt soon, and you still want to fight me? The more you attack, the faster the cataclysmic power will erupt, and the faster you will die. As a true Kiliacosm sovereign, how could Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn not understand Lin Feng's current state? It seemed like Lin Feng was a demi-Kiliacosm sovereign and a quasi-Kiliacosm sovereign, but in reality this realm was also the most dangerous. The slightest mishap would give rise to the epical cataclysm, rendering all his efforts in vain and reducing him to ashes. Lin Feng looked coldly at Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn, as if he did not care about the cataclysmic power in his body at all. He said calmly, People who kill deserve to be killed. Ridiculous. I've heard that Kiliacosm sovereigns are great and invincible. Their main battle avatar can even sweep through countless supremacies. But I don't believe it. I want to give it a try. And keep your main battle avatar from ever leaving. Lin Feng's gaze became sharper and sharper, and the battle intent on his body became stronger and stronger. Killing the Kiliacosm Sovereign's avatar. How ambitious was this? Even the best 3-star supremacy would not dare to think of it, or even harbor such ideas. Kiliacosm Sovereigns were high and mighty entities that overlooked all living beings, and were invincible. No one would think of killing the avatar of the Kiliacosm Sovereign. Moreover, it was a main battle avatar of the Kiliacosm Sovereign. This thought could be considered insane to the extreme. Ha ha ha. Ridiculous. Truly ridiculous. Moreover, you're also very ignorant. The main battle avatar of a Kiliacosm Sovereign possesses majestic power that you'll never be able to attain. Since you have a death wish, I naturally won't stop you. Don't worry. After killing you, I'll preserve your perfected spirit. After you hand over the mystery of time, you'll suffer endless torture for eternity. Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn threw his head back and laughed aloud. At the same time, his main battle avatar suddenly took a step forward. Boom! The entire small Kiliacosm appeared to be shaking. The surrounding void shattered at once. A terrifying power blotted out everything as it enveloped Lin Feng. It was as if the entire small Kiliacosm was compressing him in a frenzy. Of course, Lin Feng could sense this feeling. However, in the next moment he moved. Boom! The tide of destruction surged majestically, erupting wildly from Lin Feng's internal Kiliacosm domain. At the same time, the origin of destruction in the small Kiliacosm seemed to be activated. The entire small Kiliacosm shook. Kill! Lin Feng's battle intent soared. At this moment, it was as if a giant dragon had awakened, or a god of war had descended. Lin Feng instantly transformed into an invincible god of war. His body was surrounded by the power of various rules and the surging tide of destruction. It was as if he was standing on the river of destruction, like a god of war. He instantly tore apart the pressure of the aura of the Kiliacosm Sovereign. Moreover, he threw a punch. How dare you! Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn flew into a rage. Since when did a mere supremacy dare to attack a Kiliacosm Sovereign? Even if he was only a main battle avatar, he still represented the supreme Kiliacosm Sovereign. Ever since Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn became a supreme Kiliacosm Sovereign, no one had ever dared to attack him. Even top-notch 3-star supremacies showed the utmost respect towards him. Even if they were asked to die, those top 3-star supremacies did not dare to have any complaints. This was the Kiliacosm Sovereign, a supreme entity that controlled the life and death of trillions of living beings. But now, a mere supremacy, who was only a slightly larger ant in the eyes of the Kiliacosm Sovereign, actually dared to attack a dignified Kiliacosm Sovereign like him. How could Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn not be furious? The wrath of the Kiliacosm Sovereign was world-shattering. At this moment, the Kiliacosm Sovereign's main battle avatar erupted completely. He no longer held back at all. The entire small Kiliacosm seemed about to explode from the violent power. Run! No one had expected Lin Feng to really dare to attack, and with the main battle avatar of a Kiliacosm Sovereign at that. Forget about the difference in strength. Just this courage alone was admirable. However, seeing the terrifying power erupting from the battle between the two of them, the expressions of those descenders from the medium Kiliacosm changed drastically, like they had encountered something terrifying. In reality, the battle between Lin Feng and Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn was indeed earth-shattering. Just a little shockwave was enough to make one's heart palpitate. Even a 3-star supremacy would not be able to withstand a slight contact. Boom! Shockwaves surged. Lin Feng felt the destructive power of his internal Kiliacosm domain spread in all directions without restraint. Moreover, the origin of destruction of the small Kiliacosm also descended at once. This was almost already Lin Feng's strongest strike. It could even shake the entire small Kiliacosm. However, this strongest strike, which was enough to shake the entire small Kiliacosm, was forcefully suppressed by a palm strike from Kiliacosm Sovereign Skyhorn. Be it the tide of destruction or raw power, they were completely suppressed. The origin of destruction also carried a trace of cataclysmic power, completely destroying the surrounding void. Lin Feng grunted. He felt as if his entire body had been crushed. He had never been completely suppressed like this. In fact, this confrontation gave rise to a terrifying cataclysmic power in the tide of destruction in his internal kiliocosm domain. He knew that after this battle, and even while in combat, the epical cataclysm might be unleashed in his internal kiliocosm domain, burning him to ashes. As expected of a kiliocosm sovereign, Lin Feng was also somewhat emotional. Ever since he became a demi-kiliocosm sovereign, he had been undefeated and unparalleled. He had never met his match. Even top-notch 3-star supremacies were nothing in Lin Feng's eyes. Before his tide of destruction, they were all useless and could not withstand a single blow. The tide of destruction was the natural enemy of all controllers and life forms. It was the most terrifying power, and no one could resist it at all. However, things were different before Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn. He was a great and powerful Kiliocosm Sovereign. The power of destruction? To Kiliocosm Sovereigns, it was not worth mentioning at all. They could withstand even an epical cataclysm, so even ordinary cataclysmic power could not do anything to them. Lin Feng, a demi-Kiliocosm Sovereign, was almost unable to do anything against a Kiliocosm Sovereign. However, Lin Feng was not discouraged. He had to fight. Moreover, apart from becoming a demi-Kiliocosm Sovereign, what Lin Feng had gained the most were actually the rules he had come into contact with in the Kiliocosm core space. There were countless types of rules, which were simply innumerable and completely all-encompassing. In particular, there were the most mysterious rules of time and rules of space among them, which could even form the rules of space-time. "Stop time!" Lin Feng shouted. The rules of time enveloped Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn. Huh? The rules of time. These are indeed the legendary rules of time. You've really mastered the mystery of time. Unfortunately, you're still very inexperienced, and the rules of time you've mastered are still very, very weak. You want to confine me? That's absurd. Sensing the rules of time, rather than frightened, Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn was overjoyed. He did not hesitate to send down his main battle avatar this time despite the risk precisely for the mystery of time. Ha ha ha, the mystery of time. If you were stronger and the rules of time you mastered were more perfect, you might still pose some threat to me. But now? Break! As Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn shouted, a vast amount of strange energy immediately appeared. It was not world power, nor the power of the Kiliocosm domain, but the power of the small Kiliocosm. The power of a small Kiliocosm power completely different from this small Kiliocosm erupted. This was the true power of a Kiliocosm Sovereign. When he fought with Lin Feng previously, Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn had not used his true power as a Kiliocosm Sovereign at all. Crack. It was as if something had shattered, like glass. Those were the rules of time. For the first time, Lin Feng's rules of time actually could not confine the enemy. As the rules of time enveloped Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn, Lin Feng suddenly found that he was like an ant trying to overturn an elephant. His rules of time did not seem to confining a person, but a small Kiliocosm. At this moment, Lin Feng came to a realization. Or rather, he understood. Wasn't the Kiliocosm Sovereign himself a small Kiliocosm? Although the Kiliocosm Sovereign in front of him was only a main battle avatar, it was undeniable that the main battle avatar carried some power of the small Kiliocosm. This was the fundamental power of the Kiliocosm Sovereign. Even if there was only a little or not even 10%, it was still something that Lin Feng's rules of time could not confine. It was not that Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn had any special countermeasures, but that Kiliocosm Sovereign Skyhorn's power was too strong. Lin Feng's rules of time were far from powerful enough. After the rules of time shattered, a crack seemed to appear in Lin Feng's internal Kiliocosm domain. Traces of cataclysmic power formed in large quantities and surged. At this moment, Lin Feng could already sense the aura of the epical cataclysm. The epical cataclysm seemed ready to erupt in his internal Kiliocosm domain in the next moment. You won't have the chance. You'll never know the difference between a true Kiliakosm sovereign and a 3-star supremacy. Do you know? Although you're a demi-Kiliakosm sovereign, I've seen more than one demi-Kiliakosm sovereign like you. In the end, there were very few who truly became a Kiliakosm sovereign. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn looked at Lin Feng coldly. There was even a faint trace of pride in his eyes. That's right, pride. Even though there were very few controllers who transformed into a universe like him, there were many small Kiliakosms out there, and there were still some of them. There were also many who could reach the level of a demi-Kiliakosm sovereign. Even so, there were still very, very few people who could truly become a Kiliakosm sovereign. In fact, they were extremely rare. Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn was one of these rare Kiliakosm sovereigns. He had the right to be proud. Lin Feng's body emitted a rich cataclysmic aura. He also knew that finally, his internal Kiliakosm domain could no longer be suppressed. The epical cataclysm would erupt at any moment. In that case, Lin Feng took a deep breath and made a decision. Swoosh! In the blink of an eye, Lin Feng actually disappeared. Huh? Even the supreme spatial passage has been destroyed here. How can he disappear? Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's expression changed. He sensed a power that was different from time. Or rather, it was not just the power of time, but space-time. If the power of time was something that even Kiliakosm sovereigns dreamed of obtaining, then space-time was the power that all Kiliakosm sovereigns, be it the small Kiliakosm sovereigns or the medium Kiliakosm sovereigns, dreamed of obtaining and pursued tirelessly. However, how could a mere demi-Kiliakosm sovereign have the power of space-time? Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn's mental power covered the entire small Kiliakosm in a frenzy. With his strength as a Kiliakosm sovereign, a small Kiliakosm could not stump him at all. No matter where you run to, no matter what method you use to run, you won't be able to escape. Suddenly, Kiliakosm sovereign Skyhorn seemed to have discovered something. A trace of coldness flashed across his eyes. With a flash of his figure, he entered the space and disappeared in the blink of an eye.